In the history of every great band, there is often a silent creative soul alongside the main star, and the story of Tyrannosaurus Rex is no exception. As the spotlight focused on Mark Bolan, his co-founder was often overlooked, Steve Peregrin Took. He was a figure who embodied the entire spirit of the late 60s acid rock era, wild, mystical, and deeply experimental. With his unique stage name, eccentric performance style, and characteristic frizzy hair, Took was more than just a drummer. He was a psychedelic shaman who used his percussion to paint fantastical colors into the music, creating an unmistakable identity for T-Rex's early sound, Steve Peregrin. Took's influence as a pioneering artist is undeniable, but it runs parallel to a personal story of complexity and tragedy. His peak was tied to the golden era of Tyrannosaurus Rex, where his unique contributions helped shape the band's signature psychedelic sound. However, internal fractures ultimately led to a fraught solo career, closing the journey of a great talent with a legacy of regret and unresolved questions. Returning to London in the late 1960s, the city was shaking with vibrant changes. The Summer of Love wave from America had breathed a bold energy into the streets, but the epicenter of change wasn't found with the glamorous Beatles or the colorful pop styles of Carnaby Street. Instead, the focal point lay in the burgeoning underground music world of smoke-filled clubs like UFO and Middle Earth. This was where the youth rejected convention, a place where free love, peace marches, and LSD experiences mingled in the scent of patchouli and the sound of the sitar. The music born from this scene was not aimed at conquering the charts, but at expanding the mind, deeply blending the emotions of folk music with the ethereal vibrations of psychedelic rock. Pioneering bands like Pink Floyd and Soft Machine crafted symphonies of sound that reached for the stars. In those spaces, poets told strange tales and crowds swayed lazily under flashing lights. In this creative cradle, two destined pieces found each other. On one side was Mark Bolan, a charming artist with a storyteller's voice, captivated by myths and the stage. On the other was Steve Peregrin Took, newly named from Tolkien's world with powerful drumming and a rebellious spirit. They connected in the smoky haze of the clubs, creating a unique music that blended the wildness of the underground with the burgeoning halo of glam pop. Their music, under the name Tyrannosaurus Rex, was both strange and wonderful. The band's story reflected the era's daring spirit. Before creating those melodies with Mark Bolan, Steve Peregrin Took had lived a colorful journey, embodying the rebellion and desire for freedom of his generation. Let's explore his biography, from his childhood in South London to the fateful turn that placed him at the heart of the underground music world. Stephen Ross Porter, better known as Steve Peregrin, Took, a name he borrowed from a hobbit in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, was born on July 28, 1949, in Eltham, South London. From a young age, he was restless and rebellious, attending Shooter's Hill School, but ditching formal education at 16 to chase his passions. By 17, he was pounding drums in a local mod band called the Waterproof Sparrows, channeling the sharp, energetic beats of the scene. Yet those straightforward R&B rhythms felt too confining for his wild, untamed spirit. He craved the experimental edges of London's underground music world, where boundaries blurred and chaos reigned. Fate intervened in early 1967 when he spotted an ad in the International Times, the iconic counterculture rag. A visionary musician named Mark Bolan was seeking a collaborator for his new acoustic venture. Bolan, fresh from his stormy exit from the rock outfit John's Children, dreamed of crafting psychedelic folk infused with whimsy, stories of wizards, elves, and ancient myths set to delicate acoustics. He had the melodies, the ethereal voice, and an irresistible charisma that drew people in like moths to a flame. But he needed depth, texture, and a spark of madness to bring it alive. When Took auditioned, the chemistry was electric. Took wasn't just a drummer. He was a sonic alchemist, wielding bongos, talking drums, African percussion, a child's pixie phone, kazoo, Chinese gongs, and whatever oddity caught his eye. He added harmony backing vocals that wove through Bolan's warbling like threads in a tapestry, and his arrangements transformed Bolan's tunes into exotic, hippie, enchanting spells. Producer Tony Visconti later called their partnership a true 50-50 split, crediting Took's multi-instrumental flair and vocal layers for half the magic. Together, they busked in subways and honed their act after a disastrous full-band gig at the Electric Garden forced them into a stripped-down duo. They christened themselves Tyrannosaurus Rex, a name evoking primal power, though their sound was the opposite: intimate, mystical, and spellbinding. On stage, cross-legged on a Persian rug, they appeared as interdimensional wanderers. Bolan, the elfin poet, precise and enchanting, Took the shaggy shaman, eyes blazing with manic joy as he summoned spirits from his arsenal of sounds. Their debut album, My People Were Fair and Had Sky in Their Hair, but now they're content to wear stars on their brows, 1968, captured this essence perfectly, peaking at number 1. 15 on the UK charts and earning rave support from BBC DJ John Peel, who became their underground champion. Hits like Deborah and 1 Inch Rock cracked the top 40, and they quickly followed with Prophets, Seers, and Sages. The Angels of the Ages, 1968, and Unicorn, 1969, the latter flirting with the top 10. They were the darlings of London's hippie circuit. Their ritual-like live shows, a hypnotic escape from the era's heavier electric blues, blending Bolan's surreal lyrics with Took's organic, otherworldly grooves. Yet, beneath this enchanted alliance, cracks were forming, fueled by irreconcilable visions. Took embodied the underground's raw ethos, a Ladbroke Grove denizen, immersed in communal living, anarchic politics, and hard drugs like LSD, rubbing shoulders with rebels from the Deviants and Pink Fairies. He was writing his own darker, edgier songs, pushing for them to be included, but Bolan flatly refused, guarding his creative control. Bolan, ever the pragmatist, cloaked himself in counterculture vibes but shunned the excesses. A strict teetotaler, he lived quietly with girlfriend June Child, his gaze locked on mainstream glory, hit singles, TV spots, adoring crowds. Tension simmered during sessions for their 4th album, where Bolan edged back toward electric guitar, clashing with Took's radical leanings. A notorious incident at the UK Rolling Stone launch party didn't help. Someone spiked the punch with the hallucinogen STP, and Bolan suspected Took, dubbing him the Phantom Spiker in bitter jest. The breaking point arrived with their ill-fated 1969 U.S. tour, their first and last, poorly promoted and mismatched against thunderous acts like MC5 and the Stooges. Their fragile acoustic folk drowned in a sea of amplified fury. American crowds, craving volume and aggression, ignored the duo's subtlety. Took, disillusioned and spiraling, turned to heavy drinking and drugs to cope, his behavior growing unpredictable. In a desperate bid for attention during a Los Angeles show, echoing Iggy Pop's shock rock antics, he stripped off his shirt and whipped himself on stage in a frenzied display of self-flagellation and performance art. For Bolan, this was the final outrage, unprofessional, wild, and antithetical to the sleek pop image he craved. Back in the UK that September, Bolan acted swiftly. firing Took and recruiting the more amenable Mickey Finn on bongos by October. He rebranded as the punchier T-Rex, amplified his sound, and rocketed to glam rock superstardom with electric anthems like Ride a White Swan. Took, meanwhile, was exiled from the Empire on the cusp of conquest. Clinging to his underground ideals and deepening addictions, he ventured into new projects, forming a proto-Pink Fairies lineup, the Raw Edge Shagrat, and later Steve Took's Horns. But success eluded him, his path fading into obscurity and regret, a stark echo of lost potential. The story of a rock musician after they've been fired from a famous band is often one of two extremes. They either find new success, proving their former bandmates wrong, or they fade into obscurity. For Steve Took, the path was far more complicated, a heartbreaking journey of artistic integrity and personal disintegration. He didn't just fade away, he actively fought to stay true to the underground ideals that had gotten him fired in the first place. Immediately after leaving Tyrannosaurus Rex, Took dove headfirst back into the Ladbroke Grove scene. He formed a band called the Pink Fairies with members of the Deviants, including the drummer and writer Twink Alder. This was meant to be the antithesis of Bolan's new commercial direction. The Pink Fairies were a loud, anarchic, drug-fueled rock and roll band who championed free concerts and radical politics. For a moment, it seemed like Took had found his true home, but his tenure was short-lived. His creative vision and his increasingly unreliable behavior clashed with the other members, and he was soon out of the band he had helped form. Undeterred, he started his next project, a band he named Shagrat, another nod to Tolkien's world, this time taking the name of an orc from The Lord of the Rings. This was to be his definitive statement. He poured all his energy into it, writing songs that were a raw, powerful mix of hard rock and his own unique brand of fantasy. He even managed to get some of his rock and roll friends, including the legendary guitarist Larry Wallace from the Pink Fairies, to play on the recordings. But the music industry that was fawning over his former partner had little interest in Steve Took's chaotic, uncompromising music. Shagrat struggled to get a record deal and fizzled out. Throughout the 1970s, Took drifted. He played on a few sessions, worked on solo material that was never properly released in his lifetime, and performed sporadic, often shambolic gigs in small clubs. Once cast out from Tyrannosaurus Rex, Steve Took chose a path of fierce, unyielding integrity, a path that led not to glory, but to ruin. His life became a harrowing spiral into London's grimmest corners, a world of squats and destitution where the escape of heroin and morphine was a daily ritual. In a parallel universe of fame, Mark Bolan ascended. As T-Rex, he draped himself in glitter and starlight, ruling a kingdom of adoring fans with electric anthems like Get It On and 20th Century Boy. While one became a god of the charts, the other became a ghost of the underground, a brilliant mind being steadily erased by his addictions. And in the story's most savage irony, Took's very survival was funded by the empire from which he'd been banished. Each royalty check was a poisoned lifeline, a bitter reminder of the dream he helped build and the monster of success it had become. Friends from that era paint a picture of a man who was both brilliant and broken. He could be incredibly funny, charismatic, and fiercely intelligent, capable of holding court for hours with wild stories and insightful observations. But he was also deeply troubled, his life consumed by a polydrug addiction that included heroin, morphine, and mandrax. One friend recalled how Took would manage his meager funds, ensuring he had enough for his drugs first, and then whatever was left over for food. Yet even in the depths of his struggle, there were moments of humanity and hope. He was in a long-term relationship with a woman named Valerie Billiet, and they had a son together. He reportedly doted on the child, a flicker of domestic stability in a life defined by chaos, and he never stopped believing in his music. The unreleased solo material from this period, which has since been unearthed and released posthumously, reveals a singular talent. It's raw, messy, and sometimes difficult to listen to, but it's undeniably powerful. The sound of a man screaming his truth into the void. Perhaps the most poignant and emotionally charged fact from this period is the strange, almost parasitic financial relationship he still had with his past. He was broke, but every so often a royalty check would arrive from the re-releases of those early Tyrannosaurus Rex albums. Marc Bolan's continued success was, ironically, a lifeline for the man he had cast aside. It was a cruel twist of fate. The money that allowed him to survive and to feed his addictions was a direct result of the commercial machine he so despised, a machine powered by the man who had fired him for not being commercial enough. October 26, 1980. It was a Sunday in the modest Notting Hill maisonette Steve Peregrin Took shared with his girlfriend Valerie Billiet and her young daughter. A spark of hope had flickered that week. A long-awaited royalty check from the old Tyrannosaurus Rex American releases had finally arrived, easing the grind of financial woes that had plagued him for years. It felt like a brief reprieve in a life of ups and downs, but rather than a grand celebration, the day slid into familiar indulgence. They scored morphine and hallucinogenic mushrooms, injecting the morphine that evening as the flat filled with a hazy calm. The next morning, Monday, October the 27th, the fragile interlude ended abruptly. Steve Took was dead, just 3 months past his 31st birthday in July. For a man whose existence swirled with chaos, evictions, arrests, fractured bands, and relentless addiction, one might expect a rock star exit, an overdose in the spotlight, a brawl gone wrong, or a deliberate farewell. Instead, the coroner's report painted a scene both ordinary and grotesquely absurd. The official cause was asphyxiation. No syringe or overdose claimed him. He had choked on a single cocktail cherry, inhaled while snacking from a bowl of maraschino cherries and nuts. His senses dulled. The verdict? Death by misadventure, the law's stark term for a bizarre mishap, a freak twist of fate with no foul play. Yet for friends, fans, and biographers who've pored over his story for decades, this tidy label has always felt incomplete, stirring whispers of deeper shadows. Over 40 years on, his passing remains a quiet enigma, debated in music forums and liner notes, a puzzle that refuses easy closure. The autopsy's toxicology painted a fuller, murkier picture. Morphine lingered in his blood, alongside traces of methaqualone from the sedative mandrax and alcohol. These revelations sparked immediate speculation of suicide. Could the royalty check, meant as salvation, have instead dredged up old regrets, the glory days with Marc Bolan now distant, his own solo venture sputtering? In this theory, despair won out. Perhaps, numbed by the drugs, he orchestrated an end, the cherry a convenient mask for intent. Rumors swirled among his Ladbroke Grove circle, his history of heroin battles, the underground lifestyle, the emotional toll of being the forgotten half of Tyrannosaurus Rex. It all pointed to a man who might have chosen to slip away quietly, weary of the fight. But here's the pivotal detail that unravels the suicide narrative, often buried in reports. The coroner ruled explicitly that the drug levels were sublethal, not enough for an overdose, nor directly responsible for his death. Steve was impaired, no doubt. The morphine had numbed his mouth and throat, slowing reflexes, clouding coordination. Magic mushrooms from the night before might have added disorientation. Yet these weren't the killers. They were accomplices, turning a simple snack into peril. He lounged, perhaps still riding the high popping cherries while sipping a drink. A missed swallow, a distracted breath, a laugh at the wrong instant, and the small slick fruit lodged fatally, blocking his airway with no one to intervene in time. This prevailing view casts it as tragedy amplified by habit, not a surrender, but chaos's final ironic jab. A life of bold risks, psychedelic explorations, rebellious music, defiant living, culminating in something so banal, so preventable. It evokes a poignant what if. Had the drugs not fogged his senses? Might that cherry have been just a sweet nothing? In the end, Steve's death echoes his essence, wild, unresolved, laced with excess, leaving a legacy of songs and speculation, a brilliant spark snuffed in the most unforeseen way. When a musician dies, their story is often absorbed into the larger narrative of their band. They become a chapter, a footnote, a what if. For Steve Peregrin Took, this has been particularly true. But to see him as just a footnote is to miss the profound significance of his story, a tale of raw creativity, unyielding rebellion, and the shadows cast by rock's glittering facade. The most immediate consequence of Took's departure from Tyrannosaurus rex was, of course, the birth of T-Rex and the glam rock movement. By replacing Took's chaotic underground spirit with Mickey Finn's simpler, more photogenic presence, Mark Bolan was free to pursue pure pop stardom. Had Took remained, it's almost certain that the band's trajectory would have been vastly different. Producer Tony Visconti once described their partnership as a true 50-50 collaboration, with Took's versatility on percussion, bass, guitar, and even cello adding an exotic psychedelic depth that defined their early sound. Steve Took's story, then, is the story of the road not taken. He represents the alternate timeline, the grittier, more artistically uncompromising path that Bolan chose to abandon. He is the ghost of the band's psychedelic past, a reminder of the experimental edge that could have steered rock in wilder directions. Beyond his influence on Bolan, Took's life and struggles have a broader cultural significance. He stands as a powerful, tragic symbol of the authentic counterculture spirit. In an era where the aesthetics of the hippie movement were being co-opted and sold back to the mainstream, Took was the real deal. He lived the life, forging bonds with revolutionary underground groups like the Deviants and the Pretty Things, earning the mischievous nickname the Phantom Spiker for his pranks, like spiking drinks with hallucinogens at gatherings. His refusal to compromise was both his greatest artistic strength and the cause of his professional downfall, as he channeled that energy into raw, free-form performances at benefit events, such as the 1972 Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament Festival at Aldermaston, where he delivered sets blending songs, raps, and jokes that captured the untamed essence of the scene. Steve Peregrin. Took's life was a tragedy defined by deep contradictions. He bore a name from Tolkien's mythical world, but was submerged in a brutal reality. His chaotic, untamable spirit, a stark contrast to the gentle acoustic music of Tyrannosaurus rex, was, paradoxically, the band's initial creative catalyst, but that same raw energy which erupted through daring stage acts like self-flagellation was also what made him an outsider. He was a man out of time, clinging to an artistic purity that had no place in an increasingly commercialized industry. Therefore, his exclusion from the very success he had sparked was not a surprise, but an inevitability. Thus, his death was not just a bizarre accident, but the tragic final chapter of this story. It was raw, undignified, and completely stripped away the rock star myth, exposing a fragile human being. The cruel irony of dying by choking on a cocktail cherry, bought with royalties from the very success that had cast him out, paints a perfect, tragic portrait. The legacy Took left behind isn't one of hit songs, but of a raw truth preserved by loyal fans and posthumous recordings like Think Pink. He serves as a reminder of the wild souls who shaped rock history from the shadows, the madcap shamans, and forgotten princes of a bygone era.